Welcome to the SkullKing Football Podcast, presented by Fox DFS Firelines. Now, here are your hosts, Justin and Ryan Skullrood.
Hello and welcome to yet again another episode of the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Ryan Skullrood. I'm doing a solo show for you tonight. And tonight we're going to go over kind of the best and worst performances of the week, which there were a lot of really bad performances and there were a lot of really good performances. And hopefully you were on the correct side of those performances. We've got just a little bit of news, not a whole lot, a couple of injuries, one of them really significant. And then we will do a quick look at the Monday Night Football game for whoever has players left to kind of see who's going to be playing in there and who might be a possible help to your team. So why don't we go ahead and get started?
Today's headlines. All
right. So in today's headlines, we'll start with the bad news and just get that out of the way. It looks like Jimmy Garoppolo most likely has torn his ACL. If you saw the play, you'd see it was a non-contact injury. No one was around him. He plans to try to turn and then gets hit, but by then his knee was already collapsing. Just looking at it to begin with, it looked like an ACL. So he is most likely done for the season. Which means that C.J. Beathard's going to be the quarterback most likely for San Francisco. The only reason I mention that is if George Kittle is still around or someone is questioning whether or not they should keep George Kittle with Groppolo going down, the answer is you need to go get him now, because for those of you who don't remember, Beathard a couple years ago was at the University of Iowa. And guess who his tight end was at the University of Iowa? George Kittle. So we have some connection there that may be a good way to go if you can find something to trade for him if you don't have him already. Another bit of news, in the 5 minutes left in the game tonight, for Arizona and Chicago, or today, Josh Rosen was put in to replace Sam Bradford. They had pretty much seen enough of Sam Bradford, figured that it wasn't going to work out. And so they gave Rosen a shot, and right now they are not yet committing to starting Sam Bradford for week 4. So it looks like Rosen very well could get the start next week at home against the Seattle Seahawks, whose defense played pretty well today against that Dallas offensive line. Looks like Baker Mayfield is going to be announced Monday as the starter from here on out, as far as we can tell, for the Browns, which should be an obvious choice at this point, considering that Tyrod Taylor was just unable to move the ball at all this last week. And as soon as Baker Mayfield came in, that offense saw a massive jump start. So that is definitely something to be looking at. So, and the last bit of news, for those of you who got to see the Sunday Night Football game, congratulations to the Detroit Lions. They now have a 100-yard rusher for the first time since Reggie Bush did it in 2013. Kerryon Johnson finished with 16 carries for 101 yards against the New England Patriots as the Lions beat the Patriots tonight 26 to 10. Yep, that's correct. So congratulations to the Lions. Matt Patricia getting his first win as a head coach against his old coach. So that pretty much does it for the major headlines for today. So now what we're going to get into is our weekly segment on Sunday night, Kings and Stings. Who are the guys that we absolutely killed it for us, and the guys that absolutely killed our team. So here we go. Starting off with the quarterbacks, our 3 kings for the quarterbacks. Start off with the shootout, basically, that happened. That a lot of people were predicting that this was this game was going to turn out to be like this. Drew Brees starts us off 396 yards, 3 passing TDs, 2 rushing TDs. So for those of you who have a difference in your league between passing TDs at 4 points and rushing at 6, big game for Drew Brees, getting a few extra points in there because of those. Number 2, Matt Ryan, 374 yards, 5 TDs. For those of you who read my DFS value picks article, he was actually pretty cheap today. I want to say it was like $5,700 on DraftKings. He was my quarterback pick to be a great value for the lineup today. It turns out he played very well. Now, don't get me started on the other 3 picks that I made. My picks haven't been all that great so far, but he was definitely my best pick of the day. Just a great game throwing the ball around. So, number 3 king is Cam Newton. He only had 150 yards passing and 2 TDs, but he also finished with 10 rushes for 36 yards and 2 TDs on the ground. So 4 total TDs from him. So a good game from Cam Newton. And besides that, he also becomes the all-time leading – how do we put this? He has more rushing touchdowns than any other quarterback in NFL history. So congratulations to Cam Newton on that. As far as our stings, the guys that just really screwed us over this week, at the quarterback position, Kirk Cousins, 296 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and 3 fumbles, 2 of which they lost. So it was a rough day for the Minnesota Vikings at home against the Buffalo Bills, who got crushed 2 weeks in a row at home themselves. So a very interesting game today. Not a whole lot of production. There was only a couple of people that actually did much of anything in that game. So moving on, Tom Brady is our number 2, 133 passing yards, 1 TD, 1 interception. Just a rough game overall for the Patriots. They will definitely be looking to turn that around this next week. They still have another week where they're without Edelman, and we'll see if Josh Gordon can get into that offense and see what he can do to kind of help them out. I know one of the reasons why he's not in there, most likely, they say it's a hamstring. Well, his hamstring could still very well be giving him some issues. I think that it's also he doesn't know the playbook, and once he gets to that point, I think he'll, he could really help them out on the offense. And our third QB sting is Dak Prescott, 168 yards, only 1 TD, 2 interceptions to Earl Thomas that he threw this week. So, again, Dak has been struggling. He is not a guy that you want in your lineups. It is just not working out right now for Dak Prescott and the Cowboys. Moving on to our running back kings. And really, we've got 2 guys on the top of this list who have basically been doing it all. I mean, they have been the top of this list for all 3 weeks, basically. Alvin Kamara, 16 carries for 66 yards, not great efficiency there. However, 15 catches for 124 yards. That's the thing about this Saints offense is they can pass the crap out of the ball, and they have the weapons to catch it. It is amazing to watch that offense work. So Kamara having no touchdowns, but having a huge productive day anyways. Number 2, Todd Gurley, 23 rushes for 105 yards, a TD. He also had 5 catches for 51 yards out of the backfield. Great game from Gurley as the Rams really just took apart the Chargers today. And old man time hasn't slowed him completely down yet. Adrian Peterson with 19 carries, 120 yards, and 2 TDs. I had one team that went up against both Gurley and Peterson this week. So that's plus a couple other guys that are on our Kings list later today. So yeah, Peterson, had a great game himself. And we'll see if this can continue for him. I know that last year he was really having some issues. Last week he wasn't doing all that great. So, and just because I have a couple of honorable mentions for running backs this week. Christian McCaffrey, 28 rushes for 184 yards. No one thought that he could be a workhorse like that, and he is proven to be quite the dynamic player. I mean, we all saw what he was able to do last year, catch the ball out of the backfield. No one thought that he could, be able to really run the ball well, run between the tackles. 28 carries, 184 yards, an amazing game from Christian McCaffrey, so he gets an honorable mention. The other one is Carlos Hyde. Now, I don't know who have actually heard the story, but Carlos Hyde played in the Thursday night game. Wednesday night, his significant other went into the hospital to be induced for the birth of their child, and the baby still had not been born. Thursday, he had to get a police escort from the hospital to get to the stadium in time for the game, for warm-ups and everything. Gets to the game, plays, finishes with 23 rushes, 98 yards, 2 TDs, had a couple catches as well. Running on pure adrenaline because he pretty much hadn't slept the night before, with his wife, with his girlfriend, fiance, whatever, with the mother of his child, in labor. So, congratulations to Carlos Hyde on again for honorable mention for King of the Week in the running back position. All right, now for our running back stings. Starting it off, Chris Thompson, who's been very productive this year. A lot of people expect big things out of him. Finishes the game because of Adrian Peterson having the game that he had. 6 rushes for 17 yards, 1 reception for 0 yards. He really had no role whatsoever in this game. Basically, it was the Adrian Peterson show. Number 2, the Miami Dolphins win to go to 3-0, in spite of the fact that their starting running back has 5 rushes for 3 yards and 2 receptions for 7 yards. There was a lot of trickeration used in that game for a couple of their scores, and really they didn't need Drake to have a big game. So again, very disappointing. A lot of big things were expected from Drake this year. Have not seen the production that a lot of people were expecting. So, and sting of the week number 3, 4 rushes for 20 yards and getting ejected, I believe, in the first half of the game. Phillip Lindsay, just not what you were hoping for, let's be honest. And while it's not, just a bad performance, it's the fact that he got ejected when, he's having 5 yards of carry, was being productive in the game. To just have a moment where you aren't thinking clearly and it costs your team, costs you. That's definitely hard to swallow. And I know that, there are a lot of people that have him in their lineups because of how productive he has been so far, that game really hurt. So those are our kings and stings for the running backs. Moving on to the wide receivers. Remember how I said earlier that I had faced, the number 2 and number 3 running back on this list? Well, guess what? I also faced the number 1 wide receiver. Calvin Ridley, 7 catches, 146 yards, and 3 touchdowns thrown to him from Matthew Ryan. Big game for Ridley. Definitely not one that a lot of people saw coming. We know that the Falcons wanted to get him more involved in the offense, and boy, did they today. I can't remember. I think he had like 10 or 11 targets as well. I mean, at one point he had twice as many targets as Julio Jones, for crying out loud. So they really want to get Ridley involved, and did they ever? Number 2, Robert Woods, 10 catches, 104 yards, 2 touchdowns. So a big game from Robert Woods and playing real well in that absolutely explosive Rams offense. And finally, the old man, Jordy Nelson, 6 catches, 173 yards, 1 TD. Big game in Oakland, and Oakland loses again. I don't know if this can be continued for Jordy Nelson. It's possible, especially if, when we look at going over to the Stings. Amari Cooper, 2 receptions for 17 yards. He has just been unappetizing as a fantasy player. And I know that Gruden wanted the offense to go through him. I am not seeing it from Cooper. I think that, I know Just was really high on Cooper this year. I am not seeing it. This is just this is tough for me to see a lot of good things a lot of good consistency moving forward. So, number 2 Sting, Robbie Anderson, 2 receptions for 22 yards. Just was not. He's not the guy right now in New York for the Jets for Sam Darnold. It is Quincy Enunwa. He is going to get most of the targets in that passing offense. And number 3, after being, I want to say, the number 1 king last week, he finishes as our Sting number 3. Stephon Diggs with 4 receptions for 17 yards. A lot of short passes being thrown today by Kirk Cousins. At one point, I want to say that Adam Thielen, while he finished, Thielen finished finally with a good game. At one point, I want to say he had 11 targets for 5 catches and like 40 yards or something like that. It was really, really low. So, all right. So that's it for our wide receivers. Moving on to the tight ends. Travis Kelce. A lot of people were freaking out after that first game. What's going on with Travis Kelce? Well, they finally found the connection between Kelce and Mahomes. 8 catches, 114 yards, basically doing what we all expect Travis Kelce to be able to do. So, good game from him. Number 2, I'll bet you've never heard of this guy, and if you have, you're from Philadelphia. Dallas Goedert, I believe is his name. 7 of 7 catches for 73 yards and a touchdown. Was benched a week ago. Obviously had just an absolute career game. Let's see. Wait a second. Yeah. So 7 of 7 catches today. Good game for him. Zach Ertz is still the guy there. This is last year Trey Burton had a couple of good games in that offense, even with Zach Ertz in the lineup. So this is not a continual thing. This is not a guy to stream. He is the number 2 tight end that just happened to be, the more productive guy today. And not by much, because even Zach Ertz finished with 5 for 73. So Goedert just happened to be the one to get in the end zone. And number 3, amazingly, there actually is a Viking on the good side of our list tonight. Kyle Rudolph, 5 catches, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Really, it was the touchdown that saved him there. So those are our tight end kings. Going to the Stings, the one that hurts me the most because I had him as a guy to stream, had him in my lineup. Will Dissly, 1 reception, 4 yards. The Seahawks really wanted to establish the run, and did they ever? I want to say that Chris Carson ran 32 times for 103 yards today and a touchdown. So they really wanted to establish the run, and did they ever? So Will Dissly, he is going to be back and forth. He is not going to be a regular part of this, a regular big-time contributor like he has the last couple of weeks, but he is still a big name, or a big guy in the red zone that they will use, just not as often as we all hope. Number 2, Evan Ingram, 1 reception for 19 yards. I believe he actually went down with an injury, was not able to return to that game. So, Ingram's one of those top flights. Well, not top 10 tight ends that everyone expects big things from. You're not going to not start him. This is just one of those times where it just didn't end up working out. And finally, to be honest, I almost kind of had to put this last guy in our Stings category. And to be honest, he didn't have that terrible of a game. It's just the people who we expect to play well played well, and the guys that we don't expect to do much at tight end didn't. So Jared Cook is we'll more make him an honorary Sting, simply because it was 5 receptions, but for only 31 yards, only averaging 6 yards a catch. So not a great game from him, but really our Stings for the most part were Dissly and Ingram. So that's it for our Kings and Stings section. Finally, what we want to do is we want to look at this last game for the week, the Monday Night Football game. Pittsburgh Steelers at 0-1-1 against the 2-0 Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I got to be honest, I'm really thinking that the Buccaneers are going to take this one. If we look at the numbers, league rankings, they're the number 1 and number 2 offenses. They are going to be explosive. They're the number 1 and number 2 passing offenses, which makes sense. Defense is not so great. Rushing, not great. And really the reason that the rushing isn't great is because the Steelers in Game 2 against Kansas City basically completely abandoned the run, still used James Conner in the pass game a little bit, but didn't run with him because they needed to pass the ball in order to catch up. If they can manage to establish a run and keep a lot of the explosive plays from happening from the Bucs, James Conner is still very startable. I mean, I've got him in my lineups. I'm not taking him out of my lineups. He is still going to run that Le'Veon Bell type role. Antonio Brown, I think, has a big game here. Not necessarily because he's just Antonio Brown, but I think with him missing out on a practice, I think he's irritated about what's going on, not only with the Le'Veon Bell situation, but just a lot of attention going to Juju Smith-Schuster, who's playing phenomenally, by the way. There's no downplaying what he is doing right now. So he's definitely a start. But I think that in this game, Antonio Brown, I think it's the squeaky wheel is going to get some grease this week. And so I think that they're going to make a point of getting Brown involved in the game, in the passing game. And so I think that Antonio Brown could absolutely go off in the Monday night game. As far as the rest of the team, I know that Jesse James is a big name that's been thrown around in the streamer category for tight ends. Last week he had a huge game. Again, looking over time for Big Ben in terms of tight ends, he is never consistently used a tight end, even when he had Heath Miller, who was a great tight end. I just don't see, personally, due to past history and how Big Ben has utilized tight ends, I don't see consistency coming from Jesse James. It's possible that he could have a good game here. I'm playing the odds and not going that direction. I would rather go with O.J. Howard on the other side, who, while he may not get a whole lot of catches, his ability to run after the catch has proven to be a huge asset to him. And so, I think you start, going back to the Steelers, you start Big Ben, you start Brown, you start Schuster, you start Conner. If you're streaming James, okay. But he's not a guy that I am actively going after. I need to see a little bit more. So, in terms of Tampa Bay, you're starting Fitzpatrick because he's the number one quarterback in fantasy right now. You have no choice. You're going to start him, especially against a bad defense like the Steelers. You're going to start Mike Evans. You're going to start Deshaun Jackson as long as he's in the lineup and he's healthy, which right now he is. Chris Godwin is a possible flex play. He's finished the last couple games 40 to 60 yards and a touchdown in both games so far. He is actively being used in this offense because it's a high-flying offense. They're throwing the ball around all over the place. They don't have a running game. They're 30th in rushing. So because of that, they are going to continue to throw the ball around, and so that's what they're going to, he is going to be involved. And again, O.J. Howard, I'm starting him in a league. He has the ability, again, to make plays after the catch. So Howard is definitely a guy that I'm looking at to be playing as well. So I'm not involving myself with the running game for the Buccaneers. Even when they build up big leads and just go with the running game, Peyton Barber has not been able to do much. So really, you're involving yourself with the passing game with the Buccaneers, and that's it. You're avoiding both these defenses because, especially in this game, I think this is another shootout type of game, just like the New Orleans and Atlanta game was. So I believe that's it. That is all I have for you folks tonight. I want to thank you again for listening to the SkullKing Fantasy Football Podcast. Please make sure to go to iTunes and subscribe. Leave us a review. Leave us a rating. Subscribe on YouTube, wherever you see our podcast. We would greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Ryan Skullroot, and we will talk to you guys later. Hey, SkullKing Nation. Thank you for listening to the SkullKing Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.